Good afternoon. Today is May the 11th, 2020, and we are live with the National Center for Children and Families YouTube channel. And this is the read aloud by myself, author Glen Mourning. I am bringing some really awesome books your way as you are hopefully at home and you're safe, and you and your family and the kids are doing as best as you can with our schools being closed. I myself am a classroom teacher, formerly worked in Washington, D.C., as I am currently employed in Northern Virginia. Teaching is perhaps one of the most hardest jobs that anyone in the world could possibly do, but it is absolutely the most rewarding job that anyone has the privilege of having. As we get ready to hear a little bit about what Crunchy Life is all about, which are the books that I have written for boys and girls ages 8 and up. I just wanted to share just a little bit about myself. I'm from Connecticut, and I came down to Washington, D.C. because I heard that there were some of the most awesome teachers in the country that worked in D.C., as well as some of the most amazing families that you could service in the country as well. So with that being said, I created the Crunchy Life series to reflect what I had learned about some of the amazing families in Washington, D.C., and how resilient they are and how much people persevere and actually make the most out of their life situations. As far as I'm concerned, there are some kids in our country that have nothing on how strong and how smart some of the kids in DC are. So because of that, I created the Crunchy Life series to commemorate everything that I've learned and the life lessons that I've captured from not only my own childhood, but also from kids in DC. So Crunchy Life is literally about a 10-year-old boy named Charles Anthony Thomas who goes to a fictional charter school in Washington, D.C., and he's in the 5th grade, and he doesn't necessarily know if he's going to pass to go to middle school. Crunchy life, meaning when things get challenging or when life gets difficult, your reality is hard to swallow or hard to accept. And because of that, life can get crunchy, but you can't quit. You got to keep chewing through all of the pain and through all of the, the challenges. So in book 1, Charles starts off on the wrong foot when his new teacher, Mr. Tyrone Leroy, becomes a classroom teacher. Now, Tyrone Leroy is the superstar NFL athlete in the Crunchy Life series. I'm going to actually be reading from book 4 today. As you can see that this is book 1. So he starts off in recess detention, or like in a doghouse. He makes a poor choice when his teacher, Miss Brown, she quits and she moves to New York. She leaves her classroom, and Mr. Tyrone Leroy becomes the classroom teacher. So in book 2, as the year progresses, it gets a little more detailed in terms of what's going on in Charles's life with his classmates. So Naughty or Nice for the Holidays is where we pick up the story in the month of December going into January. Then perhaps one of my favorite parts of the year, and absolutely one of my favorite books in the entire Crunchy Life series, is Tough Cookies, which is all about Black History Month. As you can see, Colin Kaepernick is on the front cover. He actually, in a fictional setting, he actually visits Charles Anthony Thomas and the students at Elite Public Charter School, and they have a Black Lives Matter rally. And there is just a ton of life lessons that are embedded throughout books 1 through 3. Skipping ahead to book 5 as they get ready to wrap up the year, you have Charles getting ready to compete in the Mother's Day basketball tournament in Southeast DC. And that brings me to kind of putting our placement in book 4, which is the book that I'm going to be reading with you today. We won't have enough time perhaps to read through the entire chapter, as there are 100 pages in each Crunchy Life book. But I just wanted to give you that background so that I can jump into book 4, because book 4 is taking place in the month of April and May. So I wanted to share a story with you that's actually taking place like right now in our actual world, that it catches up with the timeline. All right. So I'm going to read the back I'm just going to read the synopsis, and then I'm going to get into actually reading a little bit of book 4 of the Crunchy Life series, titled One Piece at a Time. So Charles Anthony Thomas, aka Crunchy, had just experienced the time of his life. In February, during Black History Month, Crunchy was able to meet his hero, Colin Kaepernick. Now that that moment has come and gone, Crunchy seems to have forgotten that school and his efforts towards his success are what truly matter. So sadly, Crunchy has lost sight of any goals that he may have tried to set. So as I mentioned, Charles is in the classroom now where his actual teacher is a former superstar from the NFL. Imagine like LeBron James becoming your classroom teacher. So that's what is kind of like the big deal in book 2 or book 1. So in book 2, just to fast forward, we get to the point where now he's still making these poor decisions. He still puts himself in these crunchy situations, these troubling situations. And then in book 3 is where we're getting ready to pick up from, where Charles was just on television. He was on live TV. He got featured in Ebony magazine. He was literally like, he went viral. His little Instagram page that he has just blew up, and everyone thinks that he's like some awesome kid that, you know, is doing all these big things. But in reality, he's still struggling pretty bad. And his teacher, Mr. Tyrone Leroy, is the person who is doing the most, is having the most impact on his life. So without any further ado, we are going to jump into chapter 4, or excuse me, book 4 of the Crunchy Life series, titled One Piece at a Time. All right, here we go. So here we go. Here we are in chapter 1. Charles Anthony Thomas, aka Crunchy, had become a popular student. All of that fame didn't seem to help him out at all as a kid at elite public charter school. The 5th grade struggle was real, and in Mr. Leroy's class, fantastic opportunities didn't make Crunchy or challenging situations go away permanently. All of the time and commitment that Mr. Leroy dedicated to Charles seemed to be fostering a little bit of change. Mr. Leroy was feeling optimistic, but it was hard to tell for sure if any of his efforts were helping the kids in room 227. On occasion, Mr. Leroy would tell his wife that he wanted to see some major progress, but he wasn't too sure if the teaching that he was actually doing was planting any seeds of encouragement into Crunchy and the kids. He had just hoped by the end of the year that the kids would have a solid foundation for heading into middle school. But all in all, Mr. Leroy's effective strategies were starting to show a little. Here is Crunchy's report card from the 3rd marking period, which just passed in the month of April. So as you can see, Charles is starting to improve. In book 1, he had an F in reading, an F in math, a D in social studies. He had an F in science. He had an A in PE and music the whole time because he loves sports and he loves participating in music. But he was struggling in the courses that most people would consider to be, you know, pretty important in terms of reading, math, and science. So Mr. Leroy, the superstar NFL football player, was now the teacher at elite public charter school. And he had tried to remind his students that each and every day was a chance for them to do their best. He made it loud and clear that it was his job to care for her students, sometimes more than they even cared about themselves. As the warmer months of the year were approaching, things were seriously heating up in room 227. Okay, class, as we look forward to April, we will have to make sure to keep cool as the temperatures outside heat up, said Mr. Leroy. Mr. Leroy had been told by teachers in the building that when the weather warms up and when the state testing time gets closer, off-task behavior spike and student engagement drops. So for most kids, I know that towards the end of the year, when it gets warmer out and when you kind of get like a little anxious that the school year is starting to come to a slight close, there are times where I've had kids and I had to just check them like, hey, y'all, look, we got so much time in the school year left. We haven't taken our big state tests yet. We haven't taken, our final exams, or, our last report cards haven't gone out. So that's kind of like where Mr. Leroy is right now. So I can get the vibes that you are all getting excited for the end of the year, but trust me, we aren't there yet. We will be preparing for the big state test, which is why you'll all have extra opportunities to practice your skills during the Easter weekend, announced Mr. Leroy. Man, I don't care about no dang tests. All I want to do is find them Easter eggs with that money in it. My grandma is famous for putting money in them things. It's about to be Easter, excitedly called out Calvin. Meanwhile, Crunchy spent the last few days leading up to Easter sitting in class, frustrated and confused as to why Mr. Leroy wasn't as excited as he was about everything that happened in the previous weeks. Crunchy was also upset that Mr. Leroy was assigning extra homework for them all to do over the 3 weekends, or over the 3-day weekend. Extra homework on Easter? Questioned Crunchy. Why do I need extra homework? Man, forget Mr. Leroy and that dumb Easter bunny. I'm famous, cried out Crunchy. So you got to remember, when it comes to book 3, when Charles Anthony Thomas, a.k.a. Crunchy, when he met Colin Kaepernick, he really started to feel himself a little bit. He was on some like, I'm on TV, I met a celebrity. I don't need to do schoolwork. Get out of my face with all of this extra schoolwork. But as I mentioned, the year has been been pretty progressive for him. He started off failing almost every class. So as of right now in chapter 4, we're talking about how Charles is really not excited about any of this work that Mr. Tyrone Leroy has given the kids and assigned them. So during the last week of March, Mr. Leroy had been in a better mood. It was as if he was preparing to celebrate something special, but Crunchy could not feel that it had anything to do with him. Perhaps Mr. Leroy had hit the lottery, but he was already a millionaire, so maybe winning money wasn't something that would make Mr. Leroy feel even more excited about things in his life. So one afternoon, as the class prepared for dismissal, a smiling Mr. Leroy gave the extra homework assignment. The task for the students was to think of someone in their lives who had done something bad to them or to someone they loved. Then they had to write that person a letter explaining that they forgave them for causing them any pain or heartbreak. In class, don't forget, be sure to explain that whatever that person did to hurt your feelings is forgiven after they read your letter, which should mean that you no longer have any grudge or anger towards them, Mr. Leroy said. The class was dismissed, and the guys immediately began to think about who they wanted to forgive. I'm going to forgive my mom for making that burnt chicken last night, joked Calvin. Seriously, I'm going to write my uncle a letter and tell him I forgive him for not picking me up from practice that time. I was at the gym until the janitors packed up their cleaning supplies, added Jamal. Hey, Crunchy, who are you going to forgive? Asked one of his classmates. Crunchy was someone who couldn't think of the answers to questions as fast as the other kids in his class. He would need a night or 2 or even 3 to figure out a time when someone did something to him that he needed to forgive them for. So I wonder if there are any kids out there who have had a situation where you knew you should have probably forgiven someone, but it was just something that kind of got in the way. Maybe it's your pride. Maybe it's just like, the fact that being mad at them, was to you probably the right decision. But I can tell you that when you let people know that you are forgiving and that, you give someone a chance to make it up to you and you are allowing someone to apologize to you, that's important in life, because there's absolutely going to be a time when you are going to need someone to allow you back in, when you are going to be the one that needs to apologize to someone. So just keep that in mind. So chapter 2. Over the Easter weekend, Mr. Leroy and his family had just woke up from early preparation for church. Sundays were almost the most important day in the Leroy household, but this Sunday was special. Okay, girls, today is Easter Sunday, which means that we will be thanking God for all that he has provided us with, but we'll be doing it with even more gratitude because Easter is the day that Jesus arose from the grave, called out Mr. Leroy to his daughters. Daddy, is that why you've been so happy, even happier than you've been in the last couple of months? Asked Mr. Leroy's oldest daughter. Well, I'm happy that you and your sister and your mommy are so amazing and so beautiful. But yes, Easter is a special day. It allows us to celebrate our Savior, and it is also a chance to start off a new beginning. No matter what you do wrong or what someone does to you, God gave us the power to forgive people and to love everyone, answered Mr. Leroy. So you could imagine that in the classroom where the teacher would quit on the kids because of their behavior, that it would take a special type of person to last an entire year with a group that was so off the hook and so disrespectful that ultimately they would need someone who, for one, had a very strong faith that believed that what he was doing was bigger than him, right? Someone who would give up all that money and fame just to come help kids who he understood probably needed a role model like him more than anything else. So across town from the school where Crunchy and his family were preparing for an early dinner, Crunchy's mom was just getting home from work. The family hadn't been to church in a while because Crunchy's mom had to make extra money, leaving his grandma home to watch over the three kids. "Hey, Crunchy, where's your grandma?" asked Crunchy's mom as she walked into the living room. "I think she's upstairs," said Crunchy. Although she hadn't been to their church in a while, Crunchy's grandma still believed in praying. Even after her husband was killed, so grandma lost Grandpa Jones in book 1. He was fatally shot due to a senseless act of violence in the first book. All right. So I'm just bringing you kind of up to speed with some of the things that have happened, some of the trauma that has happened into the Thomas household. All right. Into the Jones household also. So Crunchy's grandma still believed in praying. Even after her husband was killed, she had never lost her faith. She had been working hard to forgive the person who took her husband's life. And on Easter Sunday, she had said a special prayer for the killer and for her husband. "Lord, forgive that child who took my husband's life, for he knew not what he had done. And no one deserves to suffer, not even those who harm us." Amen, prayed Crunchy's grandma. After she was done, she came downstairs to see an upset Crunchy who sat at the kitchen table. Next to him at the table lay 3 or 4 balled up sheets of writing paper and a ton of rubber from erasing, which was spread all out over the placemat. "Hey, baby, what's wrong? What do we have here?" asked Crunchy's grandma. "Oh, this stuff, it's just some stupid writing assignment that our stupid teacher is having us do," replied Crunchy. "Wait a minute. Are you talking about the same teacher who you've been telling people was the best teacher ever?" said Grandpa Jones. Or Grandma Jones. "That man who played in the NFL who was just on TV with you? Is that the man you calling stupid now?" "Well, he was my favorite teacher, but he don't care about me like that. All he cares about is that I figure out this stupid writing assignment," said Crunchy. As Crunchy went on to explain what the assignment was about, his grandma couldn't help but fight back tears. For some reason, she had known that if Crunchy could focus and figure out who to write to, that his teacher would be doing the whole family a huge favor. Crunchy's grandma watched and listened to him continue to struggle with not only figuring out how to start off the letter, but also figuring out who he should have addressed the letter to. Grandma Clara decided to try one more thing. "Okay, Crunchy, baby, listen up. How about we take a break from you trying to write and just listen to one of my stories," suggested Grandma Jones. Crunchy was always up for a story from his grandma, and he knew that every time she sat down and gave him some quality time, that afterwards he always felt better about himself and about school. As the two of them sat down at the kitchen table, Grandma Jones began. "Okay, now this is a story. It's one of my favorites. Once upon a time, there was a little old woman who lived in a fancy town. Every day she had to go to her job and earn money for her family so she could buy food and have clothes and pay her bills. Her job was really, really far away, so she had to take the bus to get there and to get home. Each day that she rode the bus, because of the color of her skin, she was forced to sit in the back. Sometimes if the bus was full, she would have to stand up and wouldn't be allowed to sit at all. She lived under the same type of rules as, that little girl you learned about last month named Ruby Bridges. So white men and white women treated her really awful. One morning as she boarded the bus to get to work, there were only 3 seats left. 2 of them were in the back of the bus, where she was supposed to sit, and one of them was in the front of the bus, where she was not allowed to sit. She and the other black people in the town were only allowed to sit in the back, but on this day, she did not want to feel the restrictions of the law. When she thought of where to sit down, she looked at the first seat in the back. She went to sit down in that seat, but said, "This seat is too far in the back. It won't allow African Americans to feel that they belong and that they have the right to sit anywhere and go any place they choose." She passed up on sitting in that seat. The next seat she saw was also towards the back. As she thought about sitting in the next seat, she said, "This seat is also far back. If I take this seat, it will remind our African American children that they can only go so far in life before they are stopped and told not to follow their dreams. If I sit here, young African American children may not feel empowered to become lawyers and doctors, engineers, artists, professional athletes, and any other job that is hard for them to become. So she passed up on sitting in that seat. As she made her way to the front of the bus, she spotted the last open seat. You can imagine, what is she going to do? She wasn't allowed to sit in the front, and she passed up 2 out of the 3 seats. She didn't want to sit in the back, so here we go. Let's see what happens next. As she made her way to the front of the bus, she spotted the last open seat. This seat was in a section where it was illegal for her to sit. Back during that time, there were so many things that Black people were not allowed to do that you are allowed to do today, Crunchy. African Americans never sit in that section that she wanted to sit in because it was against the law. And so she decided to sit in the front of the bus either way. When she sat in the front, white men and women yelled and screamed at her and told her to move. A policeman even came onto the bus. When they asked her what she did or what she thought she was doing, she said, "This seat is just right. It's nice and warm, and it will also help little African American girls and boys break down every barrier possible." As she sat in that perfect seat, she helped change the world forever. She showed people that keeping Black and white people segregated was not going to help make the country a better place, and that the only way to become united was to stand up for equal rights and better opportunities. But on that same day, she was arrested. She was arrested and sent to jail for sitting in a seat that was only meant for white people at the time. But even after she was arrested for doing what she knew was right, it taught us that we must learn to forgive people who mistreat us. Only love can conquer and defeat hate. So even after that embarrassment, she still had to learn to forgive. When Grandma Jones finished her story, Crunchy was positively sure that something like the bus situation would have upset a lot of people. Even though nobody died in the story that Grandma Jones told, Crunchy could tell by the way that she sounded when telling it that it was a very serious story and a very important lesson. So you got to understand, Crunchy, we can learn to forgive anyone if we remember that God is on our side and he shows us how to forgive. And that's what you want to do, added Grandma Jones. So the rest of book 4 of Crunchy Life goes into a handful of lessons that Charles continues to learn. It actually is spot on for where we are in our lives right now in the month of May, because towards chapter 4 through 8 or 4 through 9, 4 through 8, the rest of the school year starts to pick up. Book 5 is the end of the school year, but you are left without knowing whether or not Charles makes it to middle school. All right. So just as a quick recap before we have to end our amazing read aloud for this afternoon, in book 1 of the Crunchy Life series, we have Charles Anthony Thomas, who I was just reading about, who goes to a fictional charter school in DC. He goes to elite public charter school, and he is having a really difficult time in the school year, and he's not sure if he's going to make it through, but a famous football player becomes his classroom teacher, and you're going to have to read book 2 to figure out if life changes for Charles. In book 2, things are still a little rough. He misses this awesome field trip that I didn't mention earlier. I don't want to give everything away. Book 3, he's featured on a television show. He's getting interviewed next to Colin Kaepernick. He does some really awesome things. He thinks that he's like the man now. He thinks that he doesn't have to go to school and work hard like he has been and like the rest of the kids. Book 4 is where I just stopped reading after chapter 3, where we're learning a little bit about Charles and him getting ready to take on the challenge of trying to write a letter to forgive someone that may be the cause of some of his misbehavior. Book 5, the boys and the girls, they have a basketball tournament at the end of the year. They play the Southeast Wolves, and you're going to have to read book 5 to see what happens towards the end of the year. And then lastly, The latest addition to the Country Life series is book 6, technically titled The Dream Chaser, which is actually all about Tyrone Leroy, the teacher. So this is happening now, and it mainly concerns Charles, Jamal, Calvin, and Aaliyah, and some of the other classmates. But this book goes back in time and tells the story of Tyrone Leroy, who is their classroom teacher in books 1 through 5. All right. So I want to give any of the viewers an opportunity to go to my website here. And if you send me an email, the first 3 people to send an email, we are going to be sending out a set of Country Life books in the mail, as well as t-shirts for up to 3 children in the household. So I believe that my email is in the message section of the live stream. And my email address is my website where you can find my email is www.glenmourning.com. That's Glen with the 1 N, GLENMOURNING.com. And if you go to our contact form and you leave a message, if you're interested in the Country Life series, I'm going to be mailing out a series to the first, what did I say? Did I say the first 3 families? To the first 3 families, as well as t-shirts to folks who have children in the household. All right. So I just wanted to make sure again that we thank the National Center for Children and Families for allowing me to come on to our DC network to provide me with an opportunity to share Country Life. To the illustrator of Country Life covers, some of you may know him as, well, I'm not too sure what they call you, Emmanuel, Mr. E, Mr. B. But he's a brother of mine. He is someone that I've known for years. And I absolutely adore how powerful, his presence is in terms of working with the youth, which is something that I do as well. Being a family man and being someone who puts community and families first. I just wanted to thank my brother, Mr. B. And aside from that, I think that we are going to hopefully hear from some of you who may have decided to go over to glenmourning.com to shoot a message our way to request your free copies of Country Life, as well as the t-shirt sizes for up to 3 children in the household. So do yourselves a favor and also check out the free curriculum resources that go along with the Country Life series. There are parent-friendly lesson plans, over 80 pages of skills and activities that you can practice, that your children can practice, all specifically referring to the Country Life series. All right. So I had a blast reading just parts of book 4. And I look forward to the next time being able to connect with Freedom Schools. And aside from that, everybody stay healthy and be good. All right.